Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Kai Bossman. I'm a Senior Director at Cision Insights, where I oversee our branch of consultants in the United States. I'm excited to be moderating today's session, but before we get started, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items to ensure an optimal viewing experience. You can rearrange, resize, or minimize the boxes on your screen to your liking, so feel free to adjust as needed. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, the bottom icon on the left side of your screen opens to some troubleshooting tips, or you may also submit your issue in the question box. We will have time for audience Q&As at the end of our webinar, so please submit your questions in the question box to the left of the media player throughout the discussion. And at the bottom of your screen is a box that says Speak to an Expert, where you can let us know if you're interested in a free consultation with a Cision expert following this session. Finally, this session is being recorded, so all of you who registered will receive an on-demand video to rewatch or share with colleagues. But now, without further ado, let's dive into today's topic, communicating in times of uncertainty. So what usually happens during phases of uncertainty, for example, like the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. Historically, we could always witness a similar pattern of negative effects on three key areas: on the consumers, because they cut back on spending and tend to save their money; businesses, they cut back on production, investments, and jobs; and financial markets, because they show more volatility. Today, we face a multitude of uncertainties as a result of the pandemic and the attack on the Ukraine. Supply chain issues, a labor shortage, an energy crisis, especially in Europe, inflation, and a looming recession. However, what's different this time, we still have full employment. So there are more than, or about twice as many open jobs today as there are people looking for them. This is a very unique and diverse situation, and each individual industry sector is affected differently. So we will take a closer look at industry-specific developments and explore what communicators can do to stay on top of things, proactively build trust, and pick the right messages with confidence. I am very happy to introduce today's panelists. They're all insights directors and sector experts in our consulting and intelligence team at Cision. So please meet in alphabetical order. For automotive, Alison Randolph. For technology, Blake Baker. For retail, Brittany Sauter. For travel, Joshua Zitta. And for finance, Sarah Irwin. We will start with automotive. So Alison, what has been the impact on car manufacturers?
Thanks, Kai. I'm happy to be here, first of all, and happy to jump right in with automotive. So from my part of the world, I guess, I think automotive specifically demonstrates how trends or topics affect and impact different industries and vice versa. If we're looking at the last 5 to 6 years, for example, the introduction of electric vehicles, we've seen how this industry has had to align with infrastructure changes, legislation demands, production shifts, manufacturing. And in turn, we've seen how these OEMs have created communication strategies to inform not only the media, but their consumers. So I guess if we're looking currently at what the factors are for this past year, for example, auto, like a lot of the industries represented on this call, are seeing changes in consumer behavior and demand. Inventory issues due to the pandemic, supply chain disturbances, semiconductor shortages, all things that we've been hearing the last year post-pandemic. They've all set off kind of this chain reaction to low product levels with high demand and thus increased prices. So auto, this industry, it's at a time where it's crucial to be adaptable and effectively communicate these shifts while, like I said, keeping consumers informed.
That's a good point, Alison. You mentioned supply chain disturbances. We really are in a unique situation right now, both in terms of supply and demand, consumer sentiment, market volatility. Not only do we have shifting consumer demands to navigate, but also legislation demands. We have the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, signed just in August, that puts a heavy emphasis on climate change, decarbonization of the economy, and emissions reduction, which has a hand in most sectors. We have the S&P 500, which has been falling since January, putting us in the middle of a bear market. On the other hand, oil prices and non-renewable energy is rising. And as Kai mentioned earlier, unemployment rates are relatively low right now. The volatility of the stock market, imbalance of supply and demand, interest rates, and inflation put us in a unique situation, both in terms of the economy and as communicators.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in again, Sarah, I think it's important to keep in mind just how big of an effect legislation and policy can often have. So again, if we're looking at automotive, we've seen it influence everything from the way cars are designed to how parts are manufactured. And if we're looking, like I had mentioned, with this long-winded EV transition, the government has had a huge hand in fuel levels and efficiency targets. So these are often also the factors that tend to boost production costs and limit the way cars are sold and advertised.
Brittany, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Kai. I wanted to dig into some of the volatility that's been mentioned across some of these industries thus far. And obviously, I think every industry has experienced this over the last 2 years. The anticipated decrease in consumer spending has not happened within retail yet. We haven't seen it. Instead, we've seen inflation has obviously been an emergent and disruptive theme for retail this year. And similarly to just the economy in general, we've seen this specifically with the greatest impacts have been on essential categories. So food, home furnishings, supplies, gas. These high inflations have driven up costs, reduced margins, and caused shifts in consumer behavior. So we've seen consumers kind of be discouraged from making those big splash, discretionary, big ticket items. Instead, as a result, we've seen retailers have to make an even larger emphasis on prioritizing inventory optimization and have been forced to update and cut financial forecasts for the year, as well as prioritize and make reductions in corporate workforce spending, kind of to reduce those overhead costs. So despite some of the earlier predictions from analysts in 2022, where they warned of a declining consumer confidence, since we haven't really seen that yet, what we have experienced in retail are shifts in what the consumer are purchasing or prioritizing. During the most recent sales cycle, so that summer sales cycle, think Amazon Prime Day, Christmas in July, if you will, we saw a noticeable shift from want to need in terms of top items that were purchased. So obviously people are still buying apparel, they're still buying electronics, but we've seen a larger emphasis on those essential categories. So as we kind of embark on the 2022 holiday season, which we are literally currently in right now, we can expect a continued demand and emphasis on those everyday essential items. So think a little less electronics and more home goods like cookware, bakeware, utensils, vacuums, if you will.
Yeah, and Brittany raises a good point that's relevant to tech, of course, and a change in style of consumer spend is part of the answer to a recent decline in the PC market. And I think it just goes to show that despite some record successes, during peak pandemic, big tech has certainly not been immune to the latest shifts in the market. I think even further, we've seen a number of recent missed revenue targets, slowed growth, and even talk of potential downsizing. So brands have cited a number of additional factors: volatile exchange rate, limited infrastructure growth, shrinking margins due to inflation, production and supply chain limitations, policy and regulation changes that we mentioned before, labor costs, and I think even rather bluntly, underlying productivity concerns. But even beyond direct business challenges, big tech is also expected to help solve some of these problems outside of their own borders as well. So you kind of think, how can the Amazons, Googles, Microsofts help make employees more productive in a time of rising labor costs? How can they keep data safe in an increasing work from home environment? And really, for that matter, what precedent is big tech setting with their work from home policy. So they're oftentimes thought of as the pioneers and stewards of workplace policy. So while these are also examples of opportunities for the business that was, capitalized on in pandemic times, and this is an extension out to comms as well, it certainly adds another layer of complexity and adaptability for big tech to navigate and incorporate to maintain trust and positive leadership position in the market.
I think, in line with the economic factors that we've seen, impacting all these other consumer-focused sectors, the travel industry specifically has been put in a position of adjusting on the fly to external factors, making rapid adjustments to, the way they message to reassure travelers and guests. We've seen fluctuating demand, staffing shortages, shifting guidance on public health policies, all factors that have negatively impacted consumer experience and had an impact on, consumer satisfaction rates. However, we've also seen with this, opportunities that kind of arise to stand out on your efforts to prioritize customer and employee health and introduce unique initiatives and features. We've seen an increased demand for proactive communications around customer service issues, while topics like incentives for loyal customers, introducing new tech solutions that enhance the travel experience, as well as emphasis on ESG at the corporate level, all are subjects that garner significant media interest and kind of represent those areas of opportunities to help stand out, within the media landscape.
Yeah, and beyond dynamics directly impacting business operations, I think it's important to note the state of the media as well and the impact that that's had on comms. I think certainly in traditional media, we've seen consolidation of outlets, deprecation of outlets, testing paid models, global crisis taking precedent, and journalists just generally receiving a very large number of pitches for any given reporting cycle. So this has, to some extent, limited totality of coverage that will land and has certainly increased competition amongst brands on winning the right audience's eyes at the right time.
Yeah, thank you all for your expertise here. And as you can see, there are many individual and common challenges that companies and communicators are dealing with. So beyond the impact, how are brands having to react?
I think when I think of having to react, I immediately think of the retail industry. So as we mentioned earlier, we've seen a noticeable shift in consumer spending habits. So changing from, those discretionary want items and focusing on those everyday essential, more the need items, if you will. Unfortunately, these everyday essential items are also the categories that are largely being impacted by a lot of our supply chain delays, lag times. So some of the most recent shortages we're probably all very familiar with were the baby formula shortage, as well as some of the feminine care issues that have happened. Because of this, brands need to focus on communicating their inventory optimization, being extremely transparent, ensuring that those essential items are available, and if not, truly communicating when and if they will become available to the consumers. Another trend that we've seen sort of evolve over the last few years are loyalty programs as well as subscription services. They're not new. They've existed for a long time. Historically, we've had, the Costco's of the world. We've watched the evolution of Amazon Prime. But most recently, we've seen some other players come into the fold. So for instance, most recently, Walmart has been investing significantly in Walmart Plus. They're offering lower gas prices. They're offering streaming services. And then also, obviously, those exclusive perks that come with being a member of a specific subscription service. And then additionally, literally just hours ago, multiple US retailers announced their holiday strategies for the year. So we've seen kind of our early take on, kind of an early pulse, if you will, on the season this year. We're seeing an emphasis on an earlier kickoff. So kind of expanding the season to combat inflation, giving a larger window of time to shop for holiday items. And then that will hopefully decrease the financial burden that the holiday season will have on the consumer. We're seeing a lot of buy now, pay later. We're obviously seeing exclusive deals. Price matching is something that's come up, as well as an extended return window. So overall, just offering more flexibility to those consumers is one of the reactions we've seen.
Yeah, and similar to retail and what Brittany mentioned, I think automotive has witnessed this fluctuation in consumer demand as well. So thinking during the pandemic, there was this quiet kind of low demand for cars and everyone was staying home. And then of course boomed when everything has begun to come back to normal, we can say. So adapting to consumer spending behavior and revamping how the industry provides those services. So we've seen this consumer driven model lately in things like subscription services or purchase models like Carvana. So automotive is really focused on the most efficient ways to get direct access to consumers and key customers.
Certainly that impact of consumer demand doesn't end with retail and automotive. Within finance, investment managers see clients and investors continue to cautiously weigh risk and returns amid this bear market. Funds that gained popularity in recent years, green companies and renewables, ESG funds, have faced criticism more recently as energy prices rise and the performance of those ESG funds ebbs. Some say ESG funds hinder economic growth in certain sectors like non-renewable energy, which in the face of a recession has potential to further amplify the negative sentiment towards these asset managers. States like Texas and Florida, for example, are blacklisting asset managers for greenwashing and potentially hurting some sectors by divesting in non-renewables like coal and oil. Some of the world's largest brands like BlackRock and Vanguard are no longer eligible for state contracts bigger than $100,000. Thus, asset managers like this face increasing pressure to demonstrate value and maintain strong returns for their clients.
And within the travel sector, where the product is essentially the experience, we've seen pressure on the travel industry, to maintain that quality of experience, even as the external factors affecting that are continually shifting. So where passengers and guests, place a high premium on receiving optimal service, regardless of suboptimal conditions, companies that are able to be proactive in identifying and addressing consumer complaints, and this through a combination of close monitoring of trends on social media and consumer forums, and having a nimble communications team structure in place that can quickly respond to and react to those issues has really been essential for helping companies protect their reputation and shape their conversation around the services.
And big tech has worked on really solving today's challenges that we talked about earlier in the session, and not just being talked about alongside of them. There's certainly a ubiquitous nature to tech. It's obviously everywhere, and with that also comes expectations that a solution to many of the world's challenges can be engineered and developed away. So brands have made big investments on this front in enabling and skilling developers, and have been sure to cover that in moments like Code, Build, WWDC. We've also seen big investments in security, cloud infrastructure, and AI, but then also features and services focused more towards integration, collaboration, and automation. I think the common theme here is that these are all underlying elements that support workforce enablement, productivity, data privacy, and ultimately business resilience. It's really about speaking to investment and optimization for the very real problems faced by nearly all industries in uncertain times today. And I think as Brittany had mentioned earlier, kind of in the face of changing spending patterns and tightening corp budgets, I think playing up to value to buyers has also been very important in the tech industry. So being able to message as an essential service, noting previous topics, is certainly the ideal. But I think for non-essential or discretionary offerings, we've certainly seen some brands rethink things like subscription models, for example, introducing new tiers, collaboration bundles, added support and analytics for optimization, giving more options to increase the likelihood of retention over straight cancellation of services. I do think, unfortunately, however, incremental innovations, while it's still important to note for comms, that has rarely seen consistent pickup in relation to the perception of actual value. So we also talked about this in the last segment, but there is an element of creating and adhering to new policy. I think continuing with the work from home example, we saw if a brand was last in making the call, even with concerns of personal safety kind of in their messaging, it was generally not received well. Expectations are so high, and ambiguity for a large number of highly skilled employees has had a ripple effect on the industry. So some comms teams have definitely helped themselves being more proactive and clear on employee impact more so than others.
Thanks, Blake. Yeah, we've heard about the impact of uncertainty and how businesses react within individual sectors. So what should communicators be doing? Which actionable recommendations can we provide? We have 4 suggestions for you today. And the number 1 would be prepared and proactive with your messaging. Own your stories, otherwise someone else will. How can this be applied to the retail industry, Brittany?
So I think this is easier said than done, but clear, concise messaging will resonate best with your audience or your targeted media. This allows you to basically drive your own strategic narrative. This is especially crucial within retail, just because this media landscape, we have just those few critical windows of time where all eyes are on the retail industry. So obviously earnings moments are big, but those sales cycles, everybody is trying to figure out who's offering the best deals, who's offering the most exclusive perks, where can I get the most bang for my buck? And especially during the holiday season. The other side to that is that during these time periods, they're also the moments where we have the most oversaturation within our media landscape. So obviously timing is crucial. Being the first to announce something or any new strategic efforts gives you that upper hand in total exposure. Being at the forefront of news, you'll have a larger likelihood that you'll be, included in those subsequent news stories of other retailers who might follow suit or, make similar announcements. But also, it's crucial to ensure your messaging ties to your overall strategic goals. So whatever it might be, are you focusing on, ESG efforts this year? Is your overall goal to ensure that, all of your consumers are having the easiest, most seamless customer experience? Are you trying to entertain more guests to subscribe to your subscription services? So I think overall, just make sure your key messages support your overall strategic goals.
Yeah, and Blake and Brittany both touched on this, but timing of your message is definitely crucial. And this is something that can be said for any industry, right? But specifically in times of crisis or change, or especially when communicating topics that affect not just individual brands or OEMs, but industries as a whole, being first and relevant and not late to the game, so to speak, is definitely crucial. And in terms of platform resonance, it's always key to make sure you're communicating across channels. So we're not just thinking traditional outlets anymore, but thinking social media, Twitter, and of course, direct consumer forums, that type of thing.
Absolutely. As communicators, I think we need to also be thoughtful on our messaging as it pertains to educating clients and consumers. For example, within financial services, we have the increased criticism of ESG funds that I mentioned earlier. Within the past 10 years, it's become increasingly important that we have ESG offerings, but now it's critical to increase opportunities to provide thought leadership surrounding investments amid climate change, legislation, inflation, and other global issues like the energy crisis. Brands need to have focused messaging to help investors understand the meaning behind labeling funds as ESG and how those funds help facilitate corporate values. High quality thought leadership like this will help demonstrate brands' market expertise and help build trust.
And trust is definitely at the forefront for tech. So security and privacy in particular has some of the strongest correlations to negative impact on reputation and brand trust in the tech industry, particularly for repeat offenders. So breaches, attacks, and misuse of data are unfortunately a reality of today's environment. And of course, being transparent and empathetic is sort of the key to comms here. This doesn't mean kind of immediately sharing that information, of course, which could jeopardize a resolution, but it does still mean being timely and accurate, as we've already said, I think, in delivery on the impact to consumers and businesses. So folks will want to, and really deserve to, kind of know the full who, what, when, where, and why of the matter, kind of what a brand did to resolve both now and in the future. This is one of those tricky areas, I think, to really be trusted on the security front. We could also think about this in similar to sustainability, kind of topics like that. It takes proactive, ongoing embedded messaging into multiple lines of business, an obvious show of thought leadership, industry event presence, and outward investment into the area. So we've seen taking great care in this regard has helped to somewhat mitigate negativity in the event of a breach or mishandling, as folks simply have a better idea that, it fundamentally isn't the brand's way to be careless with data.
And I think when we think about kind of, obviously being prepared to react to unexpected circumstances, mitigating negative consumer reaction is absolutely critical. And, we've seen kind of time and time again, when these unexpected circumstances come up, the benefit of being able to kind of craft a timely response, in the moment, that helps kind of alleviate some of those concerns and sets the tone for ongoing messaging, as the tail of that initial spike, tails off there. But I would also kind of, throw out there that it's very important that you don't undervalue the benefit of reacting to positive events as well. We kind of consider from an engagement standpoint, where we see, the most positive response to, news stories, when we see, especially in the travel industry, situations where we have, brands have taken the opportunity to amplify unsolicited praise that they've gotten from customers, on a positive experience they had, on site, either in a hotel, while traveling, either on a cruise or, through airlines. And, also, taking the opportunity to highlight, different positive employee focused stories, via your own social media channels. It really helps kind of keep the focus on the personal experiences that your company provides, and should be equally as part of your strategy as being prepared to respond to those unexpected events.
Thanks, Josh. And this leads directly to our second recommendation, which applies to both proactive and reactive situations. And it would be use executive leadership in communications to give your company a face, to build credibility and trust. Sarah?
Definitely, it's also helpful in times of uncertainty for clients and various stakeholders to hear this thoughtful messaging directly from executive leadership. For example, BlackRock's founder and CEO, Larry Fink, writes an annual letter to CEOs. He's become one of the most influential voices in business over the past decade, and when it comes to urging corporate leaders to think beyond profits toward their social purpose. The delivery of this message directly from the CEO of the world's largest asset management firm provides a level of transparency into the corporation's values and overall investment goals.
And definitely, I think where CEO should always be that kind of first line, in communicating your company's messaging. But, there's also a lot of value in making sure that you diversify your sources as well. And that can look like utilizing leaders from across your organization, to kind of increase your chances of visibility across a broader range of media. It helps avoid overexposing your CEO. And especially when it comes to promoting, for example, either ESG or diversity efforts within your workplace, positioning those messages, with your chief people officer or potentially your CMO, can have a greater impact and really kind of allow for a more in-depth exploration of that messaging, across, again, that wider range of media than you might just get with your CEO.
Yeah, and sticking with diversifying sources, let's not forget about the importance of local market and leveraging in-market events and leaders to provide more of that kind of boots on the ground, authentic feel for a brand. When local leadership, particularly in partnership with customer leads, share quotes on a cycle, we've seen an increase in propensity to include additional messages from journalists, as well as increased engagement and readership in that local market. So whether it's a cloud chief and local government coming together on a new data center or a chief operating officer in a local grocery chain, linking together helps generate an in-depth article and grab in-market eyes that might not otherwise come from a global release.
So it is important who communicates, but it also matters which target groups you would like to reach. So a third suggestion is to make sure you know your audience and how to speak to them.
Yeah, and for most industries, the next ask and analysis has been around audience, right? Understanding authors, outlets, influencers across all media types have the eyes on what demographics and psychographics. So subsequently, can there kind of be a review into maybe which over-index on sentiment or affinity for particular topics that align with strategic comms goals and key messaging? So ultimately, this information and analysis can be used to create kind of a Rolodex or a game plan for outreach in key cycles to help maximize the effect, really regardless of what a brand's total sizing expectations are. We certainly know kind of quality and depth of coverage seen by the right folks is significantly more valuable than a passing mention. And that's really where brands need to be thinking today.
Yeah, and kind of knowing where to find the audience for a certain topic is, obviously paramount. And when we track actual views for content for our clients, we tend to see that audience, vary significantly, both based on the topic of the content and the, source where it's published. So, for example, when you're, trying to communicate messaging around new workplace initiatives, positioning that within, niche business or innovation media like Fast Company or Inc. can lead to greater visibility and engagement than potentially pushing that same messaging, to top tier national outlets where it might get kind of like overshadowed by all the other content, that's being published there. And, likewise, we see, we're looking at either, loyalty programs or consumer campaigns, those tend to resonate with readers of, specialty travel sites or, local market sites, where, the event or the initiative is really kind of centered, and where those might have kind of a comparatively small potential reach relative to some of those bigger national publications that you'd be more tempted to push for. Ultimately, like the actual kind of, eyeballs on the screen, can be a lot higher and more impactful, when you're really being cautious about intentional about, the media that you're targeting for, any individual initiative.
Yeah, and I think for automotive too, we also have that regional versus national breakdown. And I think that really applies to a lot of domestic home-based OEMs and their factories and such things as that. But even more interestingly, we've seen these attribution targets. So as far as demographics, age, gender, and kind of tailoring audiences to that for specific campaigns and activations. So it's been really more important as of lately to get granular on those audiences, which we've seen results in higher audience residence and visibility across media channels.
Absolutely. I think both Josh and Allison just touched on this too. So obviously we have our niche industry trade outlets, or your strategy for your regional focus versus your national, your demographics that you're looking to engage with. But in retail specifically, we're always going to have the consumer media outlets. Those will always be a priority for media engagement just because they handle consumer media. But I think it's also important to ensure you're proactively engaging media that you would like to start elevating your messaging as well. So for instance, within, a diversity strategy, we've actually been doing this in quite a few of our largest measurement programs, but we started to curate top tier media segmentations to showcase like how frequently these, whatever brand it is engaging with the diverse media outlets. How have they increased their visibility within those outlets? What is the actual quality of the coverage? And then kind of taking it even a step further and digging into, the key message pull through that's coming in through those particular outlets too. So kind of doing an actual overall analysis on, specific targeted outlets that you'd like to engage with more frequently as well.
Thanks, Brittany. And to successfully build and execute a strategy based on these recommendations, you definitely need to be able to understand your company's position in the media at all times. You need to understand if there are any risks, what are the challenges, are there any opportunities, what are your competitors doing, or do your communications activities have the desired effects? Which channels shall you use, and which channels give you the highest impact? So our fourth and final suggestion then would be to use or establish a media measurement and analysis program to have this information available when needed. So there are a lot of like entry-level platform solutions to track coverage in social and in traditional media out there in the market, but you can also get a tailored solution with a dedicated team of analysts and consultants to support you. And this concludes our quick panel discussion. So now we have some time for Q&A. And maybe we start with something that we really get asked a lot of times. I'll be direct that to Brittany. When talking about key messages in an oversaturated media environment, how many key messages are too many key messages, or what is then the optimal number?
Thanks, Kai. I unmute, mute. Here we go. I would say, so the recommendation from our Cision experts are to be clear and concise, kind of keeping things between 3 to 5 key messages within any given news cycle. So over complicating your messaging, making it too broad allows for improper interpretation, but then adding too many details also kind of can additionally add for misinterpretation as well. So clear, concise messaging that resonates with your audience will definitely pull through the most successful, and then we will also be able to measure that for you.
Thank you. And I think we have one that goes to travel, which is in a landscape where all competitors are impacted by the same challenges. What elements can you include that make your messaging stand out?
Yeah. So I think whether you're thinking about this in terms of a situation where you're trying to, get across like something proactively and unique that your, company is doing, or you're trying to, figure out, how you kind of get positioned within more industry level content. I think one thing that we always kind of emphasize with clients is that you always include as much data as you can with anything that you're proactively pitching, or when you're responding to kind of requests from information from journalists, including facts and figures within your outreach helps you stand out against other competitors. Provides supporting details for journalists when they're writing those general industry overviews. And kind of in those situations, it really can be, the difference between, being the focus and like headline of an article, as opposed to just being, one of the, brands that's included down in paragraph 2 or 3 as, they were also involved in this. But, you can really kind of differentiate yourself and, set the tone, if you're, kind of, again, providing those concrete facts and figures that help support and understand what you're, trying to accomplish and, the impact that it's had within your business.
Thanks, Josh. And we have another question that says, what metrics do you use to determine how effective your messaging is? In short, how do you determine success? Maybe I'll take that. So we have several ways of like measuring messaging success. So the one, and very basic, is the message pull through, to just see, okay, how many articles contain your message, how successful were you by positioning your messages in the media. I think the second metric that we would really want to look here is at the specific audience, because your message should be tailored to an audience that is the recipient of that message, a potential customer, or a potential influencer that message would relate to. So we can also look into an audience-specific metric here at determining the success of the message. And I think the third, and that's what we've been doing more and more lately, is if your messaging has an impact of your company's reputation. You can use survey data to see how your reputation develops over time, and then with some modeling exercises, we can really show, okay, which messages are effective in shaping the perception of your company, and which messages need to be adjusted to have a higher impact or a higher success rate.
And Kai, I just want to jump on this one really quickly too. And like one of the points that Brittany had made about kind of aspirational outlets as well. So I think you kind of got into a lot of the nuts and bolts about what it takes to analyze data and like very specific, data-driven outcomes there. But I think fundamentally, and if there's that aspirational piece as well. So like just placing in the outlet alone and getting that message and getting new eyes, I think as you go through some of those metrics and things that you were talking about, Kai, there can definitely be, different weighting depending on where it comes into like which targeted media list.
And here's another question for Brittany and the retail sector. That was how do you recommend the retail industry deal with the lagging negative events typical for such industry?
Yes, I think there are so many situations that are out of our control. So a lot of times we are being reactive, whether, there's a random data breach on your registers or your e-commerce infrastructure, whatever it might be. I think we've touched on this quite a bit. So I think transparency is key. So if you have, I don't know, a 3-month lag time in your delivery because of overseas supply chain logistics, it's out of your control. I think being transparent in your communications and upfront with your customers, because I think people are empathetic and they would rather see and understand what's happening for your business rather than learn about it after the fact. So they make their purchase and then they find out, oh, okay, so I won't actually be getting this for 6 months. So I think transparency is key, whether it's proactive, reactive media, and then kind of weighing in on the empathy of your customer as well.
Okay, thanks, Brittany. We have another question, maybe Blake, that's also one for you, because you already talked about the specific audiences and the changing media landscape. And the question is, for those of us working with pitching ideas rather than retail products, and the example use books, authors, academic research, news and opinions, any suggestions for successfully navigating this especially crowded traditional media landscape? Success stories, models to look toward? Are we adapting to a permanent new media landscape or hoping for back to normal there eventually? I think you're muted.
I think certainly I can answer the end of this question here, kind of, are we adapting to a permanent new media landscape versus hoping back to normal? And I feel like I've had a lot of clients ask that question, and we've done quite a bit of landscape analysis, and there isn't going back to normal, right? There's always kind of going to be the new normal, and a number of the industry leads as well. I think you have to look beyond traditional media landscape as well, right? So I think the question itself kind of mentions traditional, but kind of going beyond those sources, probably particularly in that style of outreach that you're looking to do. Particularly, it might be additional avenues to get more eyes or more specific eyes. So maybe that's social analysis into demographics and kind of really honing in on influencers there, since as opposed to only trying to do traditional. Not necessarily inferring that's what the question is, but exploring the new media landscape. Heck, I mean, we've had folks obviously forefront asking about TikTok, all of the new ways that you can communicate education, some of the messages that I think Sarah talked about earlier in the webinar today. So there's different avenues for different things that you're trying to land, and how we focus on the different demographics within those that can certainly help where we want to go.
And Blake, I might add to that, kind of building off something that Brittany said earlier when we were talking about, the importance of having kind of clarity around your messaging. I think when you're, trying to, pitch something that's more idea focused as opposed to product or service focused, that's an area where it's, extra critical to be really explicit in, what you're trying to communicate there, and, not getting bogged down in, being like incredibly comprehensive, with your messaging, but really kind of honing in on those kind of key elements that you want to communicate, and, making sure that the way that you're communicating those, again, if you have kind of simple, clear messaging, the ability to translate that messaging, across channels, becomes definitely a lot simpler, and I think more impactful, in what you're able to, actually get across, to your intended audience.
Also, like adding depth to the message with industry experts that we've talked about before. So, again, with the idea, it's something that's someone has to write a whole article about that thing. Right. So it's kind of like, is it part of that article, or is it actually going to be attached to another retail product that journalists actually that they want to write about? So they have an idea section and they have, a specific product section, and maybe they tie those two things together. Or is it actually like a full thought leadership article? Those definitely happen less. It's less common than kind of naming brands. So it's definitely a shrinking pool without a doubt.
Yeah, and to add, I think from your point earlier, Blake, I think when we're looking across traditional channels, I know we have different metrics that actually, we have that earned reach, but we also have actual readership. So like looking across these data points holistically and making sure you're monitoring that ever-changing landscape is important just to stay on track as far as, curating your audiences as well. So I think that's an important factor.
There's another question I'd probably put out to the entire team. Any trends or insights on communicating in other languages, such as Spanish? The Hispanic market is a key growth demographic across the states. What have speakers seen in this space? I think in automotive, it's a big topic, but probably also in the other fields.
I think kind of, I don't know, speaking for the, the travel industry specifically, but also I think this is kind of applicable across other sectors as well, is I would kind of like emphasize the value, again, in making sure that you're paying attention to content and trends that don't just exist in traditional media, but that are, impacting social as well, where we see kind of like a big disparity, when you start getting down into either specific demographic groups or, audiences that, are focused on like a single topic. Making sure, oftentimes, the channels that they, tend to communicate through, can vary really significantly. And, again, we'll see, either, like more extensive conversation, within, the social media space and, concurrently with that, like an opportunity to effectively reach out, to that specific demographic through that channel, as opposed to kind of counting on like, all right, we've crafted this messaging for this, specific group, we have a set media list, that we're, pushing it into, and kind of just trusting that that's going to get you where you need. I think it's, kind of becomes critical to look across those other channels and see if, even if your messaging originates, within a key set of traditional media, if elements of that start to pull through in the ongoing conversation, on social, is kind of one of the strongest indicators of how effective you are, in kind of communicating to, the groups that you're specifically trying to focus on.
Sorry, Blake. I was going to just quickly add in, like, foundationally across markets, we've seen in automotive as well, like these different media channels are different per market. So specifically for the Spanish markets in Latin America, print is heavier, radio is heavier. So just foundationally being aware of that and starting from that foundation of building those media scopes and making sure we're tracking the right channels per market is really important.
I would also add and this is just all languages and kind of different markets that you would look at, but I think I get a lot of these questions from my clients, and there might be additional analysis that goes into this rather than like just picking media targets and different media types that you kind of go out with that message on. It's sort of, how does that message resonate to that specific demographic as well? I think I raised kind of security earlier in the webinar today, and I was kind of giving a broad spectrum sweep of what security and privacy is, but I think we also know kind of the individual local market nuance and how kind of security comes across for different markets, and in effect, like those outlets that are in those markets, is very, very different as well. So I do think that there's that bit of back-end research that we want to put into what message is it that we want to put out to that market and that group as well, and then come out with, what media types it should go on.
Yeah, Blake, you mentioned cybersecurity. I think here's another question that fits perfectly to this. That says, what's the most effective approach when a tech company experiences a data breach or any leaks? How do you win back the consumer in such a moment of distrust?
Yeah, and I haven't really seen winning back in immediate sense. As I said, I think security and privacy is actually one of the more challenging ones that any tech company can face. It really needed to be kind of like a fundamental strategy that the business has, kind of saying from the ground up, like, we believe in security in everything that we do. It's sort of, even if you have a feature for your productivity suite, it's kind of in the back end of those articles trying to land the security message about, part of that feature. So even if you weren't kind of going out for this article, based on this recent enhancement for security, you kind of want it to be there. So it's consistently in folks' mind that you're absolutely trying to do that thing. but otherwise, as I said, like the timing is still super important. Of course, in the data breach itself, you know, as I said, you can't come out and just say that thing immediately. But it is sort of like within a month is what we had seen of sort of finding out. Anytime that we had seen kind of 3 months afterwards, like if an investigation took too long, kind of into what the data breach was and some of the details about it, kind of how it happened and everything, there was definitely larger negative sentiment as a result. So I think it's more mitigating factors than like immediately buying back trust, and then again reinvesting in the idea that it's fundamental to your business.
Yeah, and we have another question that might be something for travel, because I think they have experienced one of the biggest crises during the pandemic. Everything was put to a halt, be it aviation, be it the hotels. So the question is, can you speak a little more about pitching in crisis that happened during the general current uncertainty? Of course, you want to be proactive and... I think you're mute, Josh.
Yeah, when we look at the way some of our larger travel clients responded, and also to kind of just in general what we're seeing across the industry, I think there was an initial reaction to really kind of like pull back on either introducing anything new or feeling that it like wasn't the time to really kind of dive into anything that was planned. But I think kind of more and more like what we've learned and seen as like the situation that we're in becomes more and more prolonged. I think there's a level of still needing to be bold in what you're kind of willing to put out there. Not kind of like underestimating your audience's appetite for news that is on topics that are outside of the immediate kind of crisis, or like broader media focus on what's happening at either like a national economic, political, social level. And you have, again, I think pockets of audience that is are still going to be focused, like we talked about earlier, being able to kind of continue to pitch to different either like niche publications or like publications that are kind of really kind of focused within a specific topic. And I think if you have something that again is a compelling initiative, something that you feel you have really kind of clear messaging around, chances are your audience for that is out there, and it's just a question of like kind of like the effort and measures that you're going to take to go out and find that audience and make sure that you're putting that message in front of them.
Yeah, and I would add quickly, I think this is where it becomes important for reputation and sentiment tracking, because that's kind of a telltale sign among media coverage of when and how urgent you need to respond, right? So we also have this instance of, is it as impactful as you're thinking it is? So we have, like, if we compare this regional outreach to national outreach, right? So I think it's important to have that kind of baseline as well, just in terms of responding and communicating during crisis.
And I will sprinkle onto that one too. I think Blake touched on this earlier, just kind of understanding the current state of the media is important too. So journalists are receiving hundreds, maybe thousands of pitches daily. So kind of how are you differentiating yourself? A lot of the times, especially take the pandemic, for instance, we were all in the pandemic was occurring in all of our lives simultaneously. So what are you doing to differentiate yourself, differentiate your messaging, and kind of add in that layer of storytelling that might actually, get the eyes of the specific journalists or media outlets that you're looking for as well?
Hey, thanks, Brittany. And maybe as we're almost at time, one question to the group: how can today's PR promoters demonstrate the role, given the fact that the audience is diverse and multi-channel? Josh, you're muted.
Nope. Sorry, I'm back. Yeah, and I feel like that's definitely a complicated question. Would you mind actually just restating that, or at least the last bit, just to make sure I'm kind of understanding it correctly?
question is, how can today's PR promoters demonstrate the role given the fact that the audience is diverse and multi-channel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really kind of comes back, I think, to your final recommendation, Kai, when we were walking through the things that brands can be doing, and establishing like both a measurement program, not just in terms of setting yourself up with the appropriate tools to kind of measure what you're looking for, but working with your team to kind of set clear targets on what they're attempting to measure there. Establishing kind of goals that you're working towards, and something that's achievable, something that you can actually like track and put data towards, and that you're going to be able to demonstrate within your organization. This is where we are in regards to our target for the year, and these are the steps we're going to be able to take to get there. Are definitely kind of critical in that regard.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, and I think we're at time. So I'd really like to thank our panelists for your excellent expertise and conversation, and I'd like to thank everybody that joined us for our webinar today. We'll surely follow up with those of you that opted in for an expert consultation, and I think if there are any remaining questions, somebody will also follow up with you. I think there was a question for the logistics industry, which is not represented here today, but we have an Insights director that's focused on logistics, so there's definitely opportunity to have a good conversations about the trends there. Happy to help you further to apply what you've learned today. Thanks for your attention, and hope you found this valuable, and hope to see you soon in one of our other webinars.
Thank you.